Start, sir.
Okay, today is April 21, 2020, and for my semester 4 students, I am going to deal with the topic representation of sexual violence in the Kite runner. See, first thing we have to understand is before we deal with the textual analysis of this particular novel with a view to highlighting sexual violence as depicted therein, we have to understand two very important factors. Number one, what is sexual violence? And number two, what is representation? First thing you have to understand is that sexual violence is all about violence that occurs or is caused by sexuality. See, UAL, sexual, the UAL suffix, UAL suffix means of or pertaining to. So obviously sexual violence means violence that is of or pertaining to sex. So obviously sexual violence occurs with a view to attempting or engaging in a sexual act. The question of violence here, we can very easily understand, comes when there is no consensus. If the parties do not agree, then the question of violence comes. And obviously, as a concomitant factor, comes another word, that is violation. Sexual violence is all about violation. Violation of body, violation of rights, violation of choice, violation of agreement or consent. Obviously, when you talk about this as mature students of literature, we have to understand that sexual violence is all about the cause, the event, and the effect of sex. Well, we all know that there is something called domestic sexual violence and something else called conflict-related sexual violence. We all know that it is an infringement or a violation of one of the basic human rights. And as such, from the late 20th century, this has been criminalized, even though enforcing regulations has often proved very, very difficult or even impossible. We all know that the Kite Runner tells us the story of a land in crisis. It is about Afghanistan. It is about a predominantly patriarchal society, and violation or violence often occurs because of unequal power relations. The inequality in positions of power and powerlessness mean that if the powerful wants to possess the powerless, he or she can resort to sexual violence that is enforced, and the powerless has to obey, consent, or endure, even though they, in most cases, cannot report or take recourse to any redressal. If we think about the text, there are basically three kinds of human beings, typified by three individual figures that are victimized by sexual violence. There is Hassan, there is Sanawar, and also there is Shohrab. Hassan is raped by the sociopath Asif, even though it is an apparently peaceful situation. Then Shohrab is made a sexual slave, sex slave, by the Taliban functionary Asif and his cronies in a conflict situation. Sanawar, the promiscuous lady, mother of Hassan, had gone away after childbirth and come back later being slashed about and terribly injured by someone, apparently with a sexual motive. But at the same time, there are other hints at other relationships. For example, the question of Suraya's mother, Iqbal Tawhid's docile wife, who cannot sing. Here we are reminded of Mamachi in God of Small Things. There also, Papachi had forcefully prevented her from taking violin lessons or performing. It is the enforcement of marital supremacy that allows the husband figure in both the cases to physically control the creative impulse of their spouses, their wives, because of a superior power position that they hold in comparison with their wives. Now, the sexual violence that we encounter in the kite runner leads to long-standing trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder as well. We have known the spat between Hassan and Amir after Amir had failed to stand up for the rape victim Hassan. As a direct atonement of this, Amir long afterwards stands up against Asif for the rights of Shorab. Sanawar is, for example, taken back by her son Hassan, even though she had once left him in search of greener or warmer pastures. But the impact, the long-standing impact of sexual violence is typified by the case of Shorab, who loses the desire or even the ability to speak after reaching the comparative safety of America in company with a loving, caring, and understanding Amir and his wife Suraya. So, any discussion of sexual violence in the Kite Runner cannot be complete without a reference to the witness self. Even though not a direct victim of sexual violence, Amir, the witness, is fated to be affected by sexual violence that he witnesses being perpetrated against somebody before him. As a result, he develops an anxiety disorder after seeing Hassan raped, and also has to reach out to the mute Shorab after they reach America. Because by this time, the mature, well-formed character of Amir has been able to empathize with a victim. Any query in this respect will be welcome. So if you have any doubts or queries, please let me know. This much for the time being. By way of an addition to the previous discussion of sexual violence, I should tell you something about representation and the representational politics. You see, the question of representation is very, very significant in terms of sexual violence because this is socially and ideologically stigmatized. So, representation has got its own politics. Why? Because of two things. Number one, the mediating and distorting presence of language, and number two, the mediating impact of ideology or subject position. You see, we have to understand the ultra-conservative, patriarchal nature of Afghan society if we really want to make sense of sexual violence. Because in many societies, sexual violence was, is, and has been taken for granted and almost accepted as something normal. At one time, sexual violence was a phenomenon usually discussed about the violence against women and girls. Nowadays, however, it has been pointed out by sociologists, criminologists, cultural critics, and thinkers of every other denomination or hue that sexual violence can be perpetrated against and endured by any person irrespective of gender, sexuality, age, social position, even health condition. Here we will see that in the case of Sanawar, it is a grown up woman who is victimized by sexual violence. In the case of Hassan and Shoraf, however, they were at the time of assault minor ones, mere children. So we can very easily understand that sexual violence affects men and women of any age or social standing. This much, I think, will clarify any doubt that you may have regarding the representation of sexual violence in the Kite. Thank you for listening.